Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to week 14 of the semester. Yeah, I hear the laughs. Thank you guys for attending the third annual Mock Congressional Hearing put on by the Department of Public Policy Leadership in conjunction and sponsored with the Lott Leadership Institute. This is has become our signature event for our freshmen and sophomores in the Public Policy 101 class. And what a great turnout. And there's been a lot of effort put into this. There's been a lot of early mornings. I think we had a 7 a.m. meeting. I've heard recently they have been out in the classroom until 12:30, 1 a.m. So there's been some time put into this. So before we get started in this, I just want to spend a few minutes. And if you're a parent or a grandparent or a family member who supports these students, would you please stand up for just a second? Anyone that's... Thank y'all. I know we have a lot of supporters here, and it's just thank you so much for allowing us to educate these students and trusting us to be a part of this program. And it becomes a family, and they really do. And we connect with these young men and women for the rest of their lives. And it's fantastic and it's awesome. So thank you very much for doing that. For peers, other students, and campus members, thank you for attending, administrators for being here. These students really have put a lot of work into this congressional hearing. Let me just tell you a little bit about this hearing and being the third year. During COVID, when we came out of COVID, I read a book and I identified how to redesign my class based on actually walking through or navigating a line in Disney, at Disney World. How you turn a corner and there's always a new stimulation there. There's a new idea there. There's a new visualization there that keeps you entertained for 2 hours while you're miserable. And I said, how can I design a class like that? For 15 weeks, when they get tired, when individuals get to a place where they don't want to work or they're exhausted, give them another visualization, another stimulation. And this emerged from that. And that's where this kind of, we identified this. And there's some outcomes that I try to identify when I look at the mock congressional hearing. And that's one is to just increase the students' policy knowledge. And you will see tonight that will happen. And they have done an amazing job of putting together this content and this information and the research they've done. But also I want them to be able to enhance their leadership skills. And I've watched them do that over the last really 6 weeks working on this program. And they've enhanced their delegation abilities, their communication, their teamwork, collaboration, negotiation skills. I've seen that over and over again. Networking, and also, the third component and outcomes I want to see is their ability to connect and network, and that's important. And these are skills that individuals can utilize in the world, because we want to, as a department, teach these students content knowledge, but also practical skills that they can go employ as they go into the real world. So how do we arrive here today? Real quickly, as we talk about this, during the semester, they had practiced mini hearings where these individuals went in class. They did short hearings so they could get understanding of the research and topics and identify the flow of it. And after they did that, we reconfigured and they started electing and nominating representatives and policy experts. So we went through an election process. So these individuals here represent the class based on an election process. And so that's how this emerged, and these individuals are up here right now. So it's very important as we think about that these are the individuals that they wanted to represent them. So it's really important that we highlight that. And also, this year is the first year that we started putting together additional committees and assignments. And I want to highlight that for a second. I'm not going to talk about the senators or the policy experts in your programs. That's going to be highlighted in a minute. But this is the first year that we put together chief of staffs. And the chief of staffs were responsible for administering and delegating roles and responsibilities with the legislative assistants. And you'll see that in your program too. But chief of staffs, please stand up. I want to just highlight you guys real quickly. Caroline Corley, Adam Matala, Hadley Sims, Elizabeth Mora. Thank you guys. These are supposed to be the administrative roles administrative function in this whole body and in this policy. And we will see as we get reports and information back next week how each individual did. Also this year I put together a comms committee and a comms team. If you got an email, if you got an invitation, this group really worked on that. Did a great job of live streaming us and putting together a program for the high school and recruiting that we just left at 4:30 a while ago, which was fantastic. Where's the comms committee? Over here? Yeah. So Director Hannah Lloyd, Mackenzie Cox, Bailey Holly, Ella Ronwright. Thank y'all very much for the things that you guys did and the work that they put in, because they really worked directly with me, and that was just fantastic. And each other individual that's in this program, they became researchers or assistants to support one of these individuals up here. So they had assignments that they could actually delegate research for, whatever was needed. So it's been a lot of work going into this program, and I just really appreciate the information that they're going to uncover and unfold and deliver in just a few minutes, and the efforts they put together. And it's just fantastic to really work with this caliber of individuals. And it's just a fantastic opportunity of what I get to do as a professor of being engaged with these individuals every year. We have titled this, a mock congressional hearing, The Battle for the Gavel. And we will see, based on how these teams emerge, because there are teams, which will be introduced to you in a minute, your takeaway from it. So without further ado, Chair, you have the gavel.
Thank you, Dr. Holland. And before I begin, I do want to acknowledge two people who I think that if I don't initiate for it, will most certainly not take any sort of support from us, but they definitely need all of the acclamation. They've done so much work with us to aid in this development, and that's, of course, Dr. Holland and Dr. Bass. So if you could stand up, please. Thank you. Yeah, as well as has been initiated, all of our coaches, Isaiah, Denton, Cross, and Helen, thank you all so much. As has been initiated, I will serve as your chairman of this committee. This will be the Senate Committee on Rules and Administration. I'll be joined with myself, as well as my committee member to the opposite side of the aisle, which will be Senator Ingerizer, as well as on my side will be Senator Boyd, as well as Senator Allen, and then back again to the other side of the aisle will be Senator Ba, as well as Senator Peltier. And also, could you two do mic checks for me really quick? You can just say hello.
Mic check, mic check.
Good evening.
Thank you. I also would like to introduce our very esteemed panel who will be serving as our experts. That would include Mr. William Bittner, who will be representing the chairman of the Electoral Assistance Commission. We also have with us a variety of secretaries of states, which includes the Secretary of State of Minnesota, represented by John Pickering, as well as the Secretary of State of Georgia, which will be represented by Brady Moore, the Secretary of State of Arizona, represented by Ella Grace Young. We also have two other esteemed experts in their field. We have with us Dr. Katie Frazier, who is a poli-sci expert from the Brookings Institute, as well as Dr. Reagan Settle, the founding director of the MIT Election Data and Science Lab. So it is going to be a very interesting session. Not to keep you all in any more anticipation for hearing us talk for an hour and a half about policy, I'm going to begin and gavel us into session. Thank you all very much for joining us here in this 120th Congress for this session of the Senate Committee on Rules and Administration. I believe, reading from the clerk's documents, that the material that we'll be discussing today is about voting and election reform. I think that it comes as no shock seeing previous rules and previous information, particularly from the Pew Research Center, which recently showed that 42% of Americans have little to no trust in the election systems of the United States government. That's concerning, especially coming off the heels of the most contested election of our lifetimes that we've seen thus far, with 327 separate lawsuits being filed in the presidential election in 2020. I can see no greater cause of concern for this committee and for this Senate and really for the world as we look at the world's greatest democracy. Because if our constituents, if our people who we are representing here today don't have faith in the systems that make their leaders, then what are we? I think today we're going to examine a variety of issues. Perhaps, I believe we're going to talk about minority representation and whether or not that's really being delved into the system. Whether the Electoral College needs to be reformed or looked at, possible discrepancies in cybersecurity threats, and particular election reform and how institutional systems and state governments are handling their elections, which is why I'm glad that we have with us a variety of secretaries of states, because that's what's also under attack, the institution of elections themselves and who is serving in them and certifying them. And so I think it's important for us here, as we are addressing the American people and those in the gallery, to make sure that we verify that support in those institutions and that we outline here today a possible federal, state, or combination of the two solution. I'll remind my members of the Senate rules of decorum. I'll remind the audience who join us in the gallery today also on Senate rules about participation in activities we're not called upon. I'll ask that you make sure that all of your devices are silent and that you not speak unless called upon to make a statement to this committee. I believe here today that there is no greater concern than the trust in the ballot and the trust in one man, one vote. Too many people, many of them who looked like me, and many of them in very other areas of this history of this country, have fought to make sure that representation can be correct. So if we here today can come up with an issue that we can solve with that, any type of thing that we can recommend to the full Senate, I think that should be the goal today. It should be compromise, it should be understanding, it should be information from our expert panel, and it most certainly should be ensuring that that number, 42% of Americans who don't trust these systems, definitely needs to drop to zero. With that, I'll allow the opening statement from my ranking member and then proceed to opening statements from the remainder of the members on this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Wilson Angerizer. I want to thank our senators and expert witnesses for being here today, and for the opportunity to address you as ranking member. I'd like to emphasize the reason we are all here today: election reform. I cannot stress the importance of this hearing. This is one of the fundamental aspects that has built this country, and it lies at the heart of our democratic values. One of the main focuses of this hearing regards election security issues and enhanced access to elections, emphasizing the critical connection between accessibility and safety in our democratic processes. As guardians of the democratic pillars that shape our nation, we must recognize the dual challenge of ensuring the integrity of our elections while fostering an environment that encourages every eligible citizen to participate. Election security is not just a matter of protecting against external threats. It's also about fortifying the bedrock of our democracy, our citizens' faith in the electoral processes. I propose that we invest in modernizing our election infrastructure, ensuring that our states have the necessary resources to adopt state-of-the-art technologies that bolster the security of our voting systems. By providing robust cybersecurity training for election officials and establishing comprehensive audit protocols, we can significantly reduce the risk of the growing threats of Russian, Chinese, and others hacking our systems. It is imperative that this is an environment throughout our nation. Focusing on a specific part of election infrastructure to truly show the scope of this issue, modems are machines used by many states to transfer election votes into fast results. However, these modems can become targets for hackers because they connect to the internet. There have been no records of actual tampering with elections. However, as we have seen in prior elections, even the threat or chance of election fraud and instability can cause people to question and even deny the election processes as secure or accurate. Once hackers gain access to a modem, it may not even be activated within this election. According to cybersecurity expert Kevin Skoglund, quote, "Once a hacker starts talking to the voting machine through the modem, the hacker cannot just change these unofficial election results. They can hack the software and make it cheat in future elections." This demonstrates the need for better election security. As we venture into this hearing and the complex world of election reform, let us not lose sight of one of the main purposes of this hearing: to foster an environment that promotes information, not division. I hope that we can accomplish real change and show what the future of Washington politicians are capable of. With that, I yield the remainder of my time to Chairman Wilson.
Thank you, and the chair thanks you as well. With that, we'll now hear a statement from Senator Boyd. You do have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Esteemed witnesses, for generously sharing your expertise with us today. My name is Tyron Boyd, and I am truly honored to contribute to this congressional hearing representing the constituents of Mississippi. Today, I want to delve into the critical topic of voting and balloting, emphasizing the invaluable benefits of implementing same-day voter registration. By expanding voting access and endorsing same-day registration, we have the opportunity to rectify this imbalance. Research from the University of Massachusetts Amherst reveals that same-day registration significantly boosts voter turnout, especially among minority communities such as African Americans and Latinos. This study indicates that Black voter turnout increases by an average of 2 to 17 percentage points in states with same-day registration compared to non-same-day registration states. On the flip side, I find it disconcerting that in a state with 18.1% poverty rate, the highest in the nation, we encounter shortage of ballots, such as in Clinton and Byram, predominantly Black-oriented communities. The scarcity of ballots raises concerns about whether there is a systemic oppression against Black votes in Mississippi. In our pursuit of fostering a robust democracy, we must address these issues head on. Our commitment to increasing voter participation should be accompanied by tangible actions to ensure that every eligible voter has the opportunity to cast their ballot. In our democratic society, the confluence of various viewpoints is imperative for addressing pressing issues, as a singular perspective cannot singularly enhance the fabric of our society. I hold a deep respect for our democracy, and the privilege of representing the people only strengthens my commitment to this noble cause. By setting aside personal biases and diligently focusing on the task at hand, the betterment of the United States of America, we can elevate our nation, standing proudly for the liberties we hold dear. Visionaries like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Ida B. Wells, and Fannie Lou Hamer fought to secure rights for African Americans. While their efforts mark the inception, the journey is far from completion. Let us transcend this division and unite as a collective force. The paramount goal is to ensure that every voice is heard through the sacred act of casting a vote. In closing, I want to leave you with a timeless quote by Henry Ford. Coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is progress, and working together is success. Let these words just not be a sentiment, but a guiding principle for the collective work that we all will do in that lies ahead. Thank you. With that, I yield the remaining time back to Chairman Wilson.
And I thank you. We'll now move to the member on the other side of the aisle. We'll now move to Senator Peltier. Your opening statement will begin now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to restate first that it is our role as members of this committee to guarantee that the shortcomings of the past and present are corrected in a bipartisan and responsible manner in order to guarantee a better system for our citizens. While the other members of this hearing will focus on election security, nationalizing the election system, and increasing voter registration, I believe we need to focus on a problem that has plagued our nation since its inception and has been allowed to fester for far too long: gerrymandering. The term gerrymandering originates in 1812 when Governor Eldridge Gerry signed off on a new Maryland state district. The district in question was said to have resembled the shape of a salamander, and the Boston Gazette lampooned the district in an editorial cartoon with the title Gerrymander. Since then, gerrymandering has been one of the most effective tools used by political parties in order to cement control over both state governments and the national government. However, this tool comes at a most grave price: the voices of the citizens we claim to represent. Instead of creating districts that end in proportional representation for that state, both parties have focused on packing and cracking voters into districts to turn more seats over to their party. Partisan redistricting committees are actively damaging to our democracy by giving parties too much power over their own re-elections. Instead of being chosen by the voters, members of government are choosing their voters. Redistricting committees should be nonpartisan, independent, and receptive to criticism by the voters. We must return the power of the vote to those wronged by the current status quo on rampant gerrymandering. Moving on from an old problem to a new one, I also want to discuss the recent increase in mail-in voting during and following the COVID-19 pandemic. Many Americans are still concerned about the security and reliability of mail-in voting, especially as the system seems to expand every election without significant changes to the security of the system. However, I also understand that many are also concerned about recent small resurgences in COVID-19, especially for at-risk communities such as the elderly. I believe that this committee should reflect on the system as a whole in order to promote a better understanding of mail-in voting and whether the system should continue to expand. Thank you. I yield my remaining time to Chairman Wilson.
And the chair will absorb that time. Thank you very much, Senator. We'll now be hearing a statement from Senator Allen. You do have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I first want to thank all of our esteemed witnesses for being here today. I'd like to begin by addressing the purpose of this hearing, which is to thoroughly investigate the United States election system and how it can be improved upon. This not only includes election security, but also voter registration and accessibility, which are two critical issues we are facing in the context of election reform. Today, we will propose many alternatives that are centered around the betterment of our voters and country as a whole. While investigating varying alternatives, it's become clear the U.S. faces a dilemma in the lack of voter participation, mostly due to voter registration and voter access. Consequently, nationalizing our voting system would be highly beneficial for our country. Along with this system would come more accessible voting methods, such as online ballots. Many of the U.S. population find it difficult to find time to physically register to vote, so having additional alternatives would have wonderful benefits. While the other side may try to push the idea that voting insecurity comes with mail-in ballots and online ballots, there's little substantive evidence to support this claim, though. While the U.S. has had increasing numbers in voter turnout, with our numbers being higher than we've seen in decades, this country still lacks voter participation in comparison to other democratic nations that utilize online registration, election day registration, and automatic voter registration. Automatic voter registration has shown great promises in places that has been implemented, such as Oregon and Washington, D.C. While voting is a right and not a requirement, the AVR program may have front and back-end options of opting out, meaning that not everyone who is automatically registered has to continue this process. As we move into the remainder of our time, I'd like to firmly remind everyone of the importance of our election system. This country is based on the idea of representation. We, the people, elect the officials to represent our beliefs and to lead us. This is why accessibility is so necessary to our success. Without the ability to vote, there's not accurate representation, and our country will fall away from beneath our feet. With this, I yield the remainder of my time to Chairman Wilson.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator Allen. And lastly, we'll hear from Senator Baugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, members of the committee and esteemed guests. My name is Senator Amy Baugh, and I proudly stand before you all today representing the great state of Montana and my constituents in today's hearing on election reform. This right here is our Constitution. When I was chosen by my constituents to deliver their clarion call in Congress, I stood on this floor, I raised my right hand, and I swore to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, faithfully. My fellow colleagues across the aisle did the same. However, it appears some of us have lost this oath in translation. The Constitution was carefully crafted to provide protection for smaller states like my Montana from bureaucratic-backed bullying. However, the Democrats' proposals to implement a nationalized voting system seeks to take the voting power away from the hands of my constituents in Walkerville, Montana, and place it right in the hands of cronies in Washington, D.C. While there are bumps in our election systems across the country that must be addressed, these issues are states' rights issues, and on behalf of the state of Montana, I say no to nationalization. Ladies and gentlemen, I did not wish to turn this hearing into a civics class, but my colleagues across the aisle have left me no choice. The Elections Clause found in Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1 of the U.S. Constitution grants states the primary authority to regulate the times, places, and manners of holding elections. If we as Congress move to implement a nationalized voting system, we will be in direct conflict with the Constitution, the very Constitution we swore to uphold and defend. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but Montana does not want Big Brother looking over our ballot boxes, and neither does the Constitution. Additionally, nationalizing states' election processes compromises the work that many small states have done to strengthen election security and reform. For example, nationalizing our voting process and turning to all-mail voting will lead to higher rejection rates for ballots due to procedural errors associated with complex mail-in voting. Mail-in voting systems require money, personnel, and equipment that we simply do not have the luxury to afford. Using a one-size-fits-all single federal solution to states with such diverse circumstances is not a feasible approach. My fellow colleagues, I ask you, how much is your word worth? A penny? A dollar? Or a democracy? I remember my oath, my duty to this Constitution, this country, and its people. Do you? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I thank you. And I thank all of the senators up on this panel for making very decorous opening statements. I think we're now welcome to hear from our experts that have been waiting long enough. Once again, thank you all for coming on down to Washington to join us. I think we'll begin with William Bittner. Chairman, you do have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2020, an unusually passionate election year, to say the least, 66% of Americans cast a ballot, the highest turnout in 120 years. And only 2 years later, turnout fell to 46% in the midterm elections. Such poor voter turnout is a chronic weakness of American democracy. When the average American stays home, only the most partisan votes are cast, driving polarization and gridlock. And when eager voters are held back by draconian registration and voting rules, they may be driven to apathy or extremism. Making voting more convenient is not a cure-all, but it is a vital first step. Election day registration, online registration, and pre-registration for minors have all been shown to bring millions more Americans to the polls. So has expanded vote by mail, which reminds citizens of elections and allows them to vote without missing work or school. An election day holiday would further improve turnout. And not one of these policies has been shown to lead to an increase in voter fraud. This fact has been demonstrated again and again, not only by researchers, but by judges from across the political spectrum. I consider my role on the Electoral Assistance Commission to be a deeply nonpartisan one. As such, I ask that this committee not discount my words as the scheming of the other party. Every ballot cast, no matter for which candidate, is a win for American democracy, a win that is becoming rarer and rarer. In the words of President Reagan, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. As the attention span of the next generation, with their TikToks and their Twitter, gets steadily shorter, we can no longer kick the can down the road when it comes to making voting accessible. I hope my testimony will sway this Congress to take action now, before it is too late. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield the remainder of my time.
And I thank you for your sage analysis of our current state. I believe now we'll move into hearing statements from a variety of the secretaries. We can begin with the Secretary of State from Georgia. You will have the floor, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee for having me today. I have been serving as the Secretary of State for the great state of Georgia since I was elected in 2018. As Secretary of State, it is my duty to ensure that all elections that take place in Georgia are safe and secure for all Georgians. Voting is the absolute principle of our democracy. Voting is the guaranteed factor in the connection between the voters and the politicians. If we could not choose our elected officials, where would we be? Would slavery have been abolished? Would women have the right to vote? What about the programs that were created like Social Security and Medicare? Without voting, what is America? What is the value of a democracy? As Secretary of State, it is my job to make sure that all Georgians have safe and equal access to voting through secure polling places and making sure that their vote will be safely accounted for when voting has ceased. In order for America to continue as a nation, it starts with the ability to exercise our democratic right. Georgia offers 3 easy ways for voters to exercise this right. We allow for early in-person voting, absentee ballots by mail or drop-off at the request of the voter, and in-person voting on Election Day. In addition, Georgia wants all of our citizens to make their voices heard, and that's why Georgia implemented in 2016 automatic voter registration when citizens go to the DMV to apply for a driver's license. As Secretary of State, it is my job to also ensure the legitimacy of each election and make sure that the people of Georgia can feel that legitimacy once those polls are closed. It's still my belief today that there was no malpractice during the 2020 election and that certification was right. I was not elected Secretary of State for the Republican Party nor the Democratic Party. I was elected the Secretary of State for the people of Georgia, and I will continue to do right for the people of Georgia. As our primary season kicks off and we're on our way to the next presidential election, myself and my staffers will still be closely watching and making sure that all votes are accounted for and making sure that every single registered voter has the ability to make their voices heard for the future of our democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I thank you. We'll now hear from the Secretary of State from Minnesota, Mr. John Pickering. You will have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, senators, and fellow citizens, I am honored to address the crucial matter of electoral reform. Minnesota has long been a beacon of success in ensuring people's representation in the Electoral College, fostering increased voting access and pioneering policies that prioritize the ease of voter registration. Our state stands as a testament to the positive impact of embracing democratic principles that enhance civic engagement and strengthen the very foundation of our nation. In Minnesota, we have consistently championed a robust system of voter access, recognizing that the strength of our democracy is derived from the active participation of all citizens. In 2020, Minnesota broke a record when 79.9% of eligible voters in the state voted in the general election. It was the 3rd year in a row Minnesota ranked #1 in the U.S. for voter turnout. One of our key successes lies in the implementation of policies that encourage and facilitate higher voter turnout. Governor Tim Walz, on May 5th this year, signed a bill into law protecting the freedom to vote and increasing voting accessibility. Chapter 34, House File 3, establishes automatic voter registration, pre-registration for individuals over 16, permanent absentee voter status, expanding language options for voting instructions and sample ballots, and prohibitions around intimidation and interference of election officials and the voting processes. Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan were joined by myself, legislators, and advocates to celebrate the bill signing because of how much pride we take in our drive to better the election system. Minnesota proudly stands at the forefront of the movement towards mandatory voting, a policy that has proven to enhance civic responsibility and promote a more representative government. By embracing this approach, we have witnessed increased engagement across diverse communities, ensuring that voices of all citizens are heard and considered in our electoral process. By prioritizing people's representation in the Electoral College, expanding voter access, simplifying voter registration, and exploring policies like mandatory voting, we can collectively fortify the democratic foundations of our great nation. Thank you, and I yield the remainder of my time.
And the chair thanks you. We'll now move to the Secretary of State from Arizona, Ella Grace Young. You will have the floor.
Thank you for the introduction, Chairman Wilson. It is an honor to speak before the committee this evening. For the last 6 years, I've served in Arizona State Election Administration, first as the Maricopa County Recorder, and now as our Secretary of State. I believe that the integrity of our election institution is ultimately comprised of 3 main parts: accuracy, security, and voter confidence. To ensure the cumulative integrity of our election system, we must ensure the facilitation of these three pillars. Many of Arizona's policies for election infrastructure have proven successful at achieving these three goals, and I believe would be valuable models for implementation by Congress at the national level. During the 2022 midterms, we conducted logic and accuracy testing of ballot machines that all 15 of Arizona's counties successfully passed, indicating the firm accuracy of our equipment. All recounts were monitored by official representatives from each registered party in Arizona for cross-partisan accountability. And in addition, we conducted hand-counted audits of polling precincts and 1% of early ballots received in each county. We also increased security measures for mail-in ballots. All early and absentee ballots were mailed as intelligent mail, meaning that they were carefully tracked by each county. And these voting packages included both the actual ballot and an early ballot affidavit envelope for identity verification by signature. And finally, my office also created an online verification process by voters to confirm whether or not their ballot had been counted in the first place. Cybersecurity breaches were another prevalent election concern that my office worked tirelessly to combat during the 2022 midterms. We certified every piece of election equipment with a live-streamed environment with bipartisan observers. We upgraded the Arizona voter registration database to protect against AI-generated cyber attacks. And we increased the statewide use of tools like Albert monitors to defend against foreign hackers. Each of these security measures ensured the safety and reliability of our election infrastructure in Arizona. And to the final goal of voter confidence for our elections integrity, my office took firm steps to combat misinformation with publicized truth. We worked with the Citizens Clean Elections Commission to create a mobile app for voter education and mailed voter education guides to every household. These steps to promote statewide voter education have correlated with increased voter confidence and turnout in our last few elections. Committee members, as our nation prepares for the 2024 primaries, I urge you to consider the merit of Arizona's election reforms of increasing accuracy and security measures for the ballot tabulation process, as well as increasing voter education efforts to boost confidence in our elections. These reforms would do well to supplement the integrity of our voting system as a nonpartisan institution of American democracy. Thank you for your time, Chairman.
And I thank you. With that, we'll now hear from Dr. Frazier, representing the Brookings Institute. Thank you so much for bringing your expertise here. You do have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee members. It is an honor to speak in front of you this evening. Voter representation has been skewed historically in the United States. Gerrymandering has provided imbalances and limited minority representation through tactics of cracking and packing. For instance, gerrymandering in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania alone gave Republicans 16 to 17 more congressional seats than they would have had unbiased maps, the Brennan Center report said. Additionally, the proportion of minorities represented in government positions is unequal. For example, Latinos comprise 18.7% of the U.S. population, but only 5.3% of state lawmakers. Reforms have been suggested to prevent voter representation from being skewed and ensure every vote counts. For instance, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is an agreement between states to pledge all electoral votes to the National Popular Vote to ensure that the candidate with the most votes nationwide receives the presidency, therefore preserving the Electoral College but increasing people's representation. Additionally, forming elections solely around National Popular Vote is an option, but this will require abolishing the Electoral College. Furthermore, issues exist within the winner-takes-all system of these policy alternatives. Gerrymandering, minority underrepresentation, two-party dominance, lack of proportional representation, lack of electoral votes in minority parties, and large swings in political power that occur with small vote changes are all problems with the winner-takes-all system. Instead of the winner-takes-all approach, the proportional allocation of electors in each state would contribute to a more accurate representation of voter distribution within states. It would split each state's electoral votes by their popular vote percentages. For instance, if the candidate who comes in second had 35% of the votes, they would receive 35% of electoral votes for that state instead of 0. Instant runoff voting or ranked voting is also a suggested method and could be done with or without the Electoral College to reduce time and money of a regular runoff election. Each voter would rank the candidates in order of preference on the ballot. If no single candidate holds a majority, the one with the lowest percentage of votes is eliminated. After this, votes are counted again, tallying the second choice votes from those ballots whose first choice had been eliminated. The Electoral College was originally created to stop larger states from having an overpowering influence on elections and ensure smaller states had a say in who becomes president. However, it has gone against the popular vote 5 times in United States history. Therefore, it is undemocratic to promote the notion that every vote counts if the Electoral College can vote in the opposite direction of the popular vote. Thank you, Chairman.
And thank you very much. Thank you very much for your statement, and we'll now move to Dr. Settle, I believe the founding director of the MIT Election Data and Science Lab. Thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As previously stated, my name is Dr. Reagan Settle, and I serve as founding director of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Election Data and Science Lab. We collect, analyze, and share core data and findings with election officials and policy experts who can apply that new scientific research to the democratic process in the United States. At MIT, I have conducted thorough research into voting infrastructure and absentee voting. Today, I can testify with confidence that the state of election systems in the United States is vulnerable to interference. Even before the 2020 election, my colleagues and I have called against the expansion of absentee voting. We firmly believe there should be greater investment in voting machines and in-person voting. There exists a direct correlation between voting infrastructure and voters' faith in democracy. Right now, 24 states, home to over 41 million registered voters, use machines manufactured over a decade ago as their principal voting equipment. Outdated voting machines are at high risk of cyber intrusions and the inability to replace faulty parts. If my own undergraduate students can easily hack into every voting machine placed in front of them, we should be terrified that corrupt election results are a reality we must now reckon with. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, many states have expanded opportunities for absentee voting, which has increased voter turnout by an average 4%. However, absentee voting subsequently introduces greater risk for election fraud and voter error. The U.S. Government Accountability Office reports an average 1.8% vote by mail ballot disqualification rate, which is far more than the amount that automatically triggers a recount in most states. The likelihood of coercion increases drastically when voting is removed from polling sites. Mail-in voting amplifies existing inequities within our mail delivery system. For Native Americans who live on reservations, for low-income families who move frequently, and for the 67% of Americans who do not possess college-level reading proficiency to comprehend complex mail-in ballots. Just because the number of votes increases does not mean we should turn a blind eye to the consequences of a faulty election system. My testimony aims to provide academic affirmation of the flaws within our voting mechanisms. Updating our voting infrastructure and restricting mail-in voting is dire to restoring voter confidence in the democratic process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I thank you and all of our experts that have joined us here today. I know I can say for myself and definitely for the senators up on this panel that I think this was the type of information that we needed, that the American people watching needed to really understand a little bit more about the state of our election systems right now and really where we could go. I believe now we'll enter into a period of questioning. Each of the senators here will have 6 minutes to question the representatives that have represented their various policy institutes or secretaries. You will have that time, but please remember, this is questioning, not cross-examination. They are not on the stand to be eviscerated or to have aha moments. This is questioning to glean information that could be useful to the American people. And I hope that the members on both sides of the aisle here up on the panel will remember that. I will begin questioning, and then we'll follow the order of opening statements at the beginning of this hearing. I would first like to direct questioning to you, Mr. Bittner. I believe you talk a little bit about a federal holiday, and can you explain that a little bit more, maybe how other states have already implemented that or other countries, et cetera? How would that work?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. To start with, I'll say the United States is in the minority of advanced industrial democracies in not having an Election Day holiday. Peer nations like Australia, Germany, and New Zealand all have Election Day holidays. Although, I will mention that it's a little difficult to compare our turnout with theirs because some of these nations have mandatory voting.
Thank you. But we have a rather unique system in America. Our Constitution has been talked about. So could you give me some type of place that you would think is equal and to talk about that relatively?
Mr. Chairman, I would say France is probably the best comparison in terms of similar GDP per capita, government structure, and not having mandatory voting. They do, however, have their election days on a Sunday, on a weekend, which serves essentially the same purpose as an election day holiday and has contributed to a voter turnout rate of consistently over 80%. And there was a Brigham Young University study, I believe from 2017, which concluded that if the United States similarly had an election day holiday or weekend voting, we would see voter turnout increase by about 17%, driven by a 50% increase among citizens who reported being too busy with work in order to vote.
And that sounds like an incredible increase. But I do think up here, I'm a little worried. Are we actually getting people who wouldn't be at the polls anyway there, like first responders or et cetera? How does this impact them?
It is true that an election day holiday would disproportionately increase turnout among white-collar, higher-income office workers especially, while blue-collar workers such as first responders required to be on the job and maybe low-income folks who would prefer a day of extra paid overtime, they will see less benefits. But it's important to note that especially if election day or a nearby holiday were relocated such that they coincided, we would see more turnout, no matter how slight, at essentially no cost.
Thank you. I would now like to direct some questioning to Dr. Frazier, if you wouldn't mind. I think that a lot of us up here are a little interested in this interstate compact, this national voting plan. I think that a lot of Americans might be upset if they voted for one party and then saw their votes go to another party. So could you maybe elaborate on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The National Popular Vote proposal is not about sending electors a different way than voted for overall. It is simply an interstate compact to allocate all electoral votes to the winner of the popular vote, regardless of the outcome in each state. I do not believe that this would add confusion, but instead shift the focus from the number of electoral votes won to the overall popular vote. I believe the public would actually be in greater support of this system compared to the traditional electoral college system because it is more democratic, with every vote counting to support the popular vote, and no votes lost with one party barely winning over another in a state and taking all the electoral votes of the state.
Well, that's certainly something to consider. The other part of your speech that I think is central, I think, to the way we're looking forward in the future to possibly change the way we do votes, the Electoral College, definitely a big issue. Do you think that it's still serving its purpose of helping these smaller states, or are we really just seeing some swing states take up all of the money and time from presidential candidates? Is it really serving its purpose? I know you talked about that a little bit in your speech.
Yes, so 12 states received 96% of the 2020 general election campaign events, and many of these states are swing states or states with very similar proportions of Democratic and Republican districts. Similarly, in the 2012 election, 100% of the 253 campaign events were only in 12 states, and 2/3 of the general election campaigns were in Ohio, Florida, Virginia, and Iowa, according to the National Popular Vote. Presidential candidates do focus more on swing states than states with smaller populations. For instance, Florida is a highly campaigned state, and they hold a large number of electoral votes.
Wow, thank you. I also would like to utilize some of the remainder of my time to talk to the Secretary from Arizona. Thank you very much for joining us here. You talk a little bit about the efforts that you all have led. I know we've talked a lot about the retabulation methods of the 2020 election. Could you tell me, do you think the Secretary's office had the proper funding to accomplish the things that it did when that issue?
Yeah, absolutely, Chairman. In fiscal year 22, we received $18.6 million from HAVA grant money and the Election Assistance Commission. It was crucial to ensuring our election security. Now, granted, any state does want as much federal funding as possible, but I can also say that coupled with state money from our governor, that allocation is sufficient for our purposes.
And I understand that. I think you're right. Everyone wants more money. But would you agree with me, perhaps, that an expanded role of, say, the FEC or a national plan that we have right now might help future issues in your state or other states?
Well, federal funding is necessary to facilitate effective infrastructure improvements, but in terms of divvying out these funds to specifically administer election infrastructure, I believe it should be left up to the discretion of state officials, since the need and demand for specific infrastructure varies greatly across county and demographic. I mean, for example, in Maricopa County, the second largest voting jurisdiction, second to Los Angeles County, there's always been a greater need for early mail-in ballots because of its immense size, whereas smaller, more rural counties like Greenlee or La Paz in Arizona employ polling places because of their smaller size. The valuable ability of state and local election administrators like myself to tailor election infrastructure to the needs of voters would be concerningly lost in the event of federal monitoring.
Thank you very much. I believe we've hit just at my time, so I will now turn over the floor to my counterpart, Senator Ingerizer, and then the remainder of the members will have time for their questions as well. Thank you all for suffering with me. Senator Ingerizer, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll direct my first line of questioning to Dr. Frazier. So, Dr. Frazier, you highlighted the fact that Republicans took advantage of gerrymandering within certain states. What do you say to Democrats that take advantage of the exact same loophole within the law?
Thank you, Senator Ingerizer. While Republicans have been more successful with gerrymandering efforts, I would say that gerrymandering within states goes both ways. In the past few years, Democrats have made large gains in New York and Illinois. In fact, 3 Democratic-leaning districts were created at the expense of 4 Republican-leaning districts, with 1 being lost due to population decline. It's a constant battle of redistricting to gain as many seats as possible for one party or the other.
So, Dr. Frazier, would you say that Republicans are being blamed for taking advantage of this loophole because they're doing it more efficiently than Democrats are?
Thank you, Senator. Currently, yes, because Republicans have had more success in recent years, as I mentioned in my opening statement. I wouldn't necessarily say this is more fair for one party to be blamed over the other, because in reality, gerrymandering still exists, and both parties are at fault for attempting to draw district lines to favor their own party.
Thank you, Dr. Frazier. I'll now direct my line of questioning to Secretary Moore. Mr. Secretary, to the best of your ability, can you please look at this map of Georgia in detail if you see any blatant gerrymandering?
Senator, to the best of my ability, no. I can see around the greater Atlanta metro area, the districts seem a little sprawled, a little dense, but I think that's to occupy because 60% of the population of the state of Georgia occupies in the greater Atlanta metro area. The other 40% is around the state, so those smaller districts are trying to make those other congressional districts more even in population. In addition, Georgia is made up of 7 Republican members of the House, 6 Democrat members of the House. We have 2 Democratic senators. Our governor is a Republican. Me, the Secretary of State, is a Republican. So overall, we're a pretty very diverse state, and I'm proud of that diversity.
Thank you, Secretary. And then I'll bring up another map. And again, to the best of your ability, can you look at the map of Iowa and also detail if you see any blatant gerrymandering? This map.
To the best of my ability, Senator, I don't see any counties being cut off. They all seem to be in a very geometric lines, seem very even.
Thank you. And now I want you to see this map of Illinois. And again, if there's any blatant gerrymandering within this state.
Whoa. Well, Senator, to the best of my ability, compared to the other 2 maps, there doesn't seem to be a sense of order. The districts themselves seem to be cutting off counties, specifically the 13th district there, which goes from the south up into the eastern part in the middle of the state. I think from here, I can see that it highlights East St. Louis, Springfield, the capital, Decatur, Illinois, and Champaign-Urbana. Those are all urban areas, and usually what we see in urban areas is Democratic leaning. So my assumption would be that that district was specifically meant to give a Democrat an edge in the seats of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Based on examples shown, it is not fair to assume that Republicans gerrymander more, such as Dr. Frazier alluded to in her opening statement. We saw just 2 states with Republican leadership that are clearly not gerrymandered. We then saw a map of the state of Illinois, which is overwhelmingly led by Democrats, prominently featuring blatant gerrymandering that increases the amount of congressional seats the Democrats hold within the state. Rationally, it does not make sense to draw the congressional districts for Illinois this way. unless there's an underlying motivation to unfairly steal seats from Republicans and nullify citizens' rights for representation within the government. The Republican leadership over the states of Georgia and Iowa resulted in clearly defined lines, which raises the question, which party should we be looking to for election infrastructure and integrity? With that, I now want to direct my live questioning to Secretary Young. Secretary Young, I was intrigued by your brief mention of cybersecurity infrastructure in Arizona, particularly your use of Albert monitors. Could you elaborate a little more about these measures and their significance to yours and other states?
Yeah, absolutely, Senator. We were assisted by the Department of Homeland Security's cybersecurity agency to integrate Albert monitors into our existing infrastructure. Albert monitors are hardware devices that use threat signatures to detect and report intrusion attempts into a connected computer. They have been very useful assets against foreign interference in our elections. But there is a concern, however, that the Election Assistance Commission may no longer permit states to use HAVA grants to fully fund the purchase of Albert monitors. And there's a particular concern here in smaller counties, which use their servers not only for elections, but also for other county governance functions. My concern is that faced with the need to pay much of the cost of the monitors themselves, counties will simply opt out of using them altogether.
Thank you. And now I'll direct my final line of questioning to Secretary Pickering. Secretary Pickering, your state of Minnesota has made multiple changes to the way your election systems handle cybersecurity. For instance, you allocated about $1.5 million towards modernizing your equipment and instituting cybersecurity training for counties and cities. However, would you see this implemented on a larger scale, considering Minnesota is about the 50th percentile when it comes to population?
Yes, so when it comes to proportions between state by state, our state is smaller than the rest when it comes to population. Though the United States Election Assistance Commission awarded my state $14 million in the last election cycle to help with security and cybersecurity for our elections. However, with states like California, they awarded $73.5 million, and with Texas, they awarded $49.5. So the proportions are there.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Time has elapsed, and we will now be moving on to questioning by Senator Boyd. I would like to remind the senators that we've had opening statements and that questioning time is for questioning. So Senator Boyd, it is now your floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is for Dr. Seattle. You talk a lot about our faulty voting operation. So my question is, what do you propose we do to minimize voting fraud, but also ensure that every voice is recognized at the polls come election time? Because we want the results to be fair and impartial.
Senator Boyd, to minimize voter fraud, we should steer away from expanding absentee voting and stick to in-person polling places. When it comes to safety measures with existing mail-in voting systems, ballots have unique barcodes and security numbers that prevent duplicate voting. Paper ballots are used because they are the most safe and a paper trail can be traced. Although using hand-marked paper ballots at polling sites is the most secure method of voting and the only way to have meaningful post-election audits. If you are focused on increasing voter turnout to ensure the American public is best represented, I suggest not expanding mail-in voting, but rather creating an election season rather than a singular election day, allowing in-person voting at polling locations for longer hours and more days, as well as establishing automatic voter registration, such as in Georgia and Mr. Moore's state, will ensure fair, impartial elections and higher voter turnout.
Thank you, Dr. Seta, for that answer. I'm sorry. My second line of question is for Secretary Moore. I'm glad to know about your viewpoint in the 2020 presidential election and your commitment to your office. Please provide me with just two answers. How many registered voters are there in the state of Georgia? And of those registered voters, how many of color were registered to vote?
Thank you, Senator Boyd. In the state of Georgia, as of 2021, we have 7 million active registered voters. Out of those active registered voters, 3.2 are a race of other than white. Those numbers, if you want to look down into, because we break down each one very specifically, you can go to sos.ga.gov.
Thank you for that. My second question to you, what voting awareness initiative does the state of Georgia take to ensure that everyone is educated on their voting rights?
Senator Boyd, it's always my goal to make sure that as many people as possible can go out and vote. That's why we champion our automatic voter registration that happens at our DMVs. So making sure that people, when they get their driver's license at 16 or 18, those individuals are able to go out and vote as soon as possible. And I really love that about our state. And another thing is, Senator Boyd, I'm not really good with technology. it's not one of my strong suits, but our website at sos.ga.gov is very easy to manage. It has our timelines for registration. It has our timelines for registration for our runoff election. So if you're not qualified, if you don't qualify to vote in the original election, we have a runoff, you can still vote in the runoff and execute your right as a citizen to have your voice heard. Also, you can follow our social media accounts. You can follow my Secretary of State account, GA, at GA Sec of State on Instagram, or my personal at Brady D. Moore on Instagram as well. Thank you.
Glad to know about your social media handle, Secretary Moore. One last question for you. One last question. Are there any talks about making Georgia a same-day registration state?
Senator, to the best of my ability, no, that's up to the legislature. But like I stated earlier in my opening and the previous question, we have automatic voter registration at our DMVs for citizens to take part of. But I'd be open into same-day voter registration too. If people can't make it to the DMVs and they wait to the polling places, I think that's an awesome way to get people out to vote.
Thank you. My second line of question will be for Secretary Young. Based on your testimony, Arizona has impeccable systems to ensure that no voter fraud will happen, which is quite wonderful. My first question is Arizona election infrastructure has Arizona election infrastructure always been this way, such as the logistical stuff and accuracy, testing and recounts, or is this something that was implemented when you stepped into this role?
Yeah, 2022 was the first election when we implemented both of these policies at the macro level. My office partnered with the Carter Center, a non-partisan nonprofit, to publicly host the logic and accuracy testing in all 15 counties. With the public being there, there was increased accountability. And for the accountability measures specifically, we did our best to incorporate opportunities for bipartisan monitoring at every step of the way. Logic and accuracy testing, ballot recounts, and the certification of cybersecurity equipment, to name a few.
Thank you for that. One last question. What is the first step, in your opinion, do you think states should take to ensure that voting is accurate while also being secure?
I would have to say bipartisan accountability measures. Again, this means bringing in representatives from registered parties to fairly observe election activities. Like many of the examples I mentioned earlier in my opening statement, we can get to the nitty-gritty of accuracy and security all day long. But the starting point, however, the crux of this issue, I would say, is having everyone on the same page, safeguarding against potential partisan corruption and manipulation of ballots on either side of the aisle. And on top of protecting against partisan influence, emphasizing bipartisan accountability protects against more neutral issues like tabulation error and cybersecurity breaches. Senator Boyd, the advantages of bipartisan accountability are tenfold.
Thank you all so much for answering those questions for me. I feel a little more ready to, have to get everything together. I remain any remaining time back to Chairman Wilson.
And the chair will choose to yield that time to the absorption. We'll now move on to Senator Peltier, who will have his full 6 minutes for questioning. You may begin now.
Thank you. First off, addressing Dr. Fraser, you mentioned in your opening statement your concerns about gerrymandering. I am curious as to what you see as a solution to this problem.
Thank you, Senator. According to the Brennan Center, partisan gerrymandering is inconsistent with the democratic ideals enshrined in the Constitution, and Americans since the founding generation have vehemently denounced it. I believe the founders of the United States never meant for redistricting to be the way it is today, and certainly never meant for gerrymandering to ever occur. To combat gerrymandering, redistricting should be less in the hands of partisan politicians and more so in the hands of independent commissioners, as few state legislatures have done. By doing so, districts would be more evenly spread throughout each state to provide a fair advantage to any party, not prioritizing one over the other and allowing third parties a better chance to gain political advantage than in the past.
Thank you. Again, addressing Dr. Fraser, you also discussed in your opening statement the Electoral College, including its initial goal of protecting smaller states. But you also mentioned dismantling the Electoral College. I believe the Electoral College still protects those states and believe that dismissing the Electoral College would be damaging to those states. Can you clarify your beliefs on the Electoral College?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I believe the Electoral College seeks to protect smaller states by giving all states equal representation in the Senate and at least one representative from each state in the House. However, I do not believe that this has made enough of an impact in protecting smaller states in practice. Through the Electoral College system, campaigns have honed in on swing swing states and focus their attention on addressing the needs and concerns of those states, rather than giving equal attention to all states equally, therefore disproportionately valuing some states more than others, and decreasing efforts to protect smaller states in the process. With flaws in the Electoral College system as it is today, with the popular vote having gone against the Electoral College 5 times in the course of American history, I believe that taking into consideration the popular vote more so than the Electoral College vote would be more beneficial to smaller states, so that the campaigns focus on addressing the needs of all states more equally, including smaller states, instead of focusing the large majority of campaigning on swing states. Thank you.
Thank you. Now addressing Dr. Settle. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle have historically supported the expansion of mail-in voting, recently using COVID-19 as their scapegoat. Do you believe mail-in ballots are simple and secure enough to warrant that expansion?
Senator Pelche, medical professionals within the CDC and research field have concluded that even with the new variants EG5 and BA286, that we should not fear returning to a pandemic state in which we risk running out of beds and ventilators in hospitals. With stronger immunity, high vaccination rates, effective treatments, health professionals are now lumping COVID in with other respiratory illnesses like the flu and RSV. While we may have increased numbers at this point in time, numbers will continue to wax and wane mildly at peak respiratory illness each winter. However, I do not advise expanding absentee voting options simply based on regular illness seasons. If doctors are now placing COVID on par with the flu, and we do not change election policy for the flu, mail-in voting is not more important than ever. In-person voting would be virtually inconsequential with regards to impacting COVID numbers. Ergo, I will continue to urge against the expansion of absentee voting.
Thank you. Also, do you believe that absentee ballots will be necessary for elderly individuals in the face of infection?
The elderly are the primary users of mail-in voting. Again, Senator Pelche, medical professionals now have placed COVID on par with the flu, but I fully understand the concerns of immunocompromised elderly. In every U.S. state, you can already apply for an absentee ballot either automatically for being 65 or older or for illness or disability, depending on what state you reside in. The Americans with Disabilities Act Amendments Act qualifies a diagnosis or condition that substantially limits immune system function as a disability, entitling protections. So for the elderly who find themselves immunocompromised and or fearful of entering a polling place, they can visit a healthcare provider to receive an official diagnosis if they do not already have one. So they are already qualified for mail-in ballots everywhere. The expansion of absentee voting is not necessary or practical.
You yet again. One last question. What reasoning do you have against the nationalization of mail-in voting, considering that 28 states and the District of Columbia have implemented the policy?
Based on our research findings at the MIT Election Data and Science Lab, my colleagues and I still call against the expansion of absentee voting. While it has already been made available in many states, expanding a flawed system that reinforces inequities and increases risk of election fraud and voter errors lessens the effectiveness of the democratic process. Just in terms of operational efficiency, absentee ballots slows result times. Ballots must still be counted as long as they are postmarked by Election Day, so it takes much longer to calculate results. Increasing the percentage of mail-in ballots will further extend this calculation time. If mail-in ballots are now a way of life for elections in select states, choosing to establish a nationalized approach will introduce massive operational issues I highly advise against.
Right. Thank you very much. I finished my questioning. I yield my remaining time to the chair.
And the chair will absorb that time. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to hear questioning from Senator Allen. You will have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bittner, you've previously mentioned the importance of voter convenience. Could you enlighten the committee on the relationship of certain demographics in relation to registration alternatives?
Of course, Senator. So firstly, allowing voters to register online particularly favors younger voters who are often more comfortable doing work and filling out forms online than by mail or at the DMV. But it also helps voters for whom English is not their first language, because it is much easier and cheaper for states to provide multilingual resources online than by printing out a bunch of different language forms or, goodness gracious, hiring translators at DMVs and other offices. Allowing minors to pre-register to vote, on the other hand, would, of course, favor turnout among younger voters, especially because many young people visit the DMV for the first time long before they turn 18. And we can expect that this would increase turnout among young voters, a critical but underrepresented demographic, by about 13%. Allowing election day registration would particularly increase turnout among voters with lower education levels who tend to be less aware of registration deadlines. And we can expect about 7.5 million more ballots cast on election day with such a policy. And finally, automatic voter registration, which I'm very happy to hear they have implemented in Georgia, if expanded, would increase turnout nationwide by as much as 15 million votes, especially, again, among lower education level workers who may be less aware of their voting rights.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bittner. I would now like to direct my questions to the Secretary of State for Arizona. Secretary, I understand your points about how the tabulation process worked out for the previous election system when issues were thought to arise. Would you agree with me that a federal and state joint program officially making rules about these instances might have produced a faster and more trusted version of events rather than the unconstitutional grab Senator Baugh alleges?
I'm not sure if I understand what unconstitutional grab you're referring to, but like I discussed with Chairman Wilson earlier, I do still firmly believe that the administration of election infrastructure should be left to the discretion of state and local officials. Now, I cannot speak for other states, but in Arizona, leaving this issue up to local regulation has produced much more simple and understandable rules for voters. I also think that a blanket federal regulation simply would not create a more efficient process than local regulation, since no two states nor citizenries are the same. Because demographics vary greatly across counties, the need for differentiated election infrastructure makes sole state regulation much more feasible than a state-federal cooperative. So to that point, I do agree with Senator Baugh. The security of our tabulation infrastructure should be left to state discretion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to now move on to Dr. Settle. Can you give us a number of our population that utilize mail-in ballots compared to in-person voting?
Senator Allen, in the 2016 election, 33 million mail-in ballots were cast out of 136 million votes. In the 2020 election, during the COVID-19 pandemic, approximately 65 million mail-in ballots were cast out of 159 total votes. By percentage, that's 24% of vote by mail in 2016 and 40% in 2020.
Okay, thank you for that enlightening answer. You briefly mentioned cybersecurity intrusions earlier, but I'm hoping that you can expand on what type of cybersecurity intrusions are actually happening and to what extent are these intrusions affecting us in reality?
Senator Allen, the systems and voting machines contain personal information like Social Security and driver's license numbers. Cyber intrusions risk this information being compromised. I stress the outdated fleet of voting machines throughout our nation. Machines manufactured in the 2000s will be rendered unusable within the next 10 years. Furthermore, old machines are at greater risk of technical glitches or failures, which can lead to lost votes and longer wait times. Cybersecurity intrusions are an issue we will reckon with in the near future if we do not increase our investment into voting infrastructure.
Thank you. I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you. When I heard questioning statements from Senator Baugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will first direct my line of questioning to Secretary Pickering. Mr. Secretary, given your state's expansion of mail-in voting, do you think voting absentee is a simple and secure system, yes or no?
I firmly believe the answer to your question is yes, specifically in the state of Minnesota. So yes, it is simple in the fact that through many policies, we have made it more accessible to our citizens than ever before, whether it is through voting in person or even absentee voting. And yes, it is also secure. We have received multiple grants through the United States Election Assistance Commission and through HAVA to bolster our cybersecurity and overall safety to our elections.
Interesting. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Dr. Settle, I ask you, in your professional opinion, do you believe moving towards a nationalized mail-in voting system would have devastating consequences given the existing problems that still need to be addressed within current state election systems?
It would. Transitioning towards a nationalized approach will weaken voter confidence in our election systems and compromise election security. Research in elections data and political science has proven time and time again that the expansion of mail-in voting results in dire consequences for the effectiveness of the democratic process. I will repeat findings reported in my opening statement that the U.S. Government Accountability Office reports a 1.8% vote-by-mail ballot disqualification rate, which is well more than the amount triggering automatic recounts in most states. In the 2008 presidential election in Minnesota, 4.2% of mail-in ballots were rejected due to procedural errors by voters, 12,000 out of 288,000, which in-person voting would have solved. In the 2010 California consolidated general election, the Riverside Congressional District precinct disqualified 12,500 apparently misplaced ballots after a miscommunication between the post office and election officials when they did not arrive before the polls closed. 12,500 people did not get a vote because of a miscommunication with mail-in ballots. There exists compelling evidence up to 5% of mail-in ballots do not get counted, up to 10% in some states. Voters who request mail-in ballots often don't return them, so it's practically impossible to know whether these mail-in ballots are lost, stolen, or intentionally unsubmitted. Expanding all-mail voting in the U.S. states will further disenfranchise otherwise legitimate voters due to inevitable mishandling and voter error avoided at in-person polling sites. So Senator Baugh, should we adopt a nationalized mail-in voting system? No, beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Thank you for your insight, Dr. Settle. Secretary Moore, does the state of Georgia have mail-in balloting? And if so, can you explain how your state has worked to address the mail-in voting process and the issues that Dr. Settle has highlighted?
So to answer your question, Senator, no, the state of Georgia does not have mail-in voting. The only time we have mail-in voting is at the request of the voters. Voters are able to request an absentee ballot, and they can mail it in or they can turn it into drop boxes. Going off that, we believe that in-person voting is one of the safest and securest ways to vote in America. Your vote doesn't have to travel from post office to post office. It's there at the polling place to get counted. In addition, when we use electronic machines, our electronic machines print an actual ballot with a barcode so that you can see what you press. If you have questions, you can ask the poll workers. In contrast with mail-in voting, you can't ask anybody. Once you mail the ballot, it's done for. You can ask a question, and then that's where we get those rejections. In my personal opinion, I don't have good handwriting. My teachers in grade school told me I didn't have good handwriting. So if I filled out that ballot wrong, my ballot would be discontinued, and I'm the Secretary of State of Georgia. So it does not make common sense to improve mail-in balloting when we still have so many more questions, when in-person voting is there for the direct lines of answers for voters.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your response, and a thank you to Secretary Pickering and Dr. Settle. What I've gathered from your answers is that it's evident that the calls for nationalizing our electoral process through a mail-in voting system, or even considering the repealing of the Electoral College, are not effective solutions. Instead of these rash, sweeping proposals, we need a common sense, conservative approach to election reform that ensures simple and safe solutions, expanding voter access and strengthening election security. We need to work together as opposed to partisan politics that always ends up dividing us into R's and D's. It is precisely these divisions that contributed to the cloud of confusion and contention that marred the results of the 2020 election. We need to focus on how we can take bipartisan action to support state election officials, poll monitors, and systems as a whole through more funding, increased training, increased auditing, and stronger cybersecurity. It is this way we can truly ensure voter confidence in our electoral process and safeguard our democracy. I've said it once and I will say it again. Using a one-size-fits-all single federal solution to states with such diverse circumstances is not a feasible approach. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I thank you. And I thank all of the senators that asked questions. I thank very much our experts that have given us so much information and have endured through our questioning and sometimes filibusters. I thank you all very much for being here. I believe we'll now go into closing statements, beginning with the ranking member and then myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Republican Party are forward thinkers. The Democratic Party seems to believe that we should not care about cybersecurity reform because there have been no recorded instances within the US. However, what we, the Republicans, are worried about is the possibility of one. It has been proven time and time again that states are not using the best equipment or methods for voting. This leaves certain states vulnerable to these attacks. If there was a cybersecurity attack on our nation that succeeded, especially regarding polling and elections, all citizens' beliefs within not only our election system, but the entire country would collapse. It would be an even worse instance than what happened in the 2020 election, with disbelief, stigma, and distrust running rampant throughout the country. But the major difference is that this time it is supported by substantive proof that the Democratic Party does not acknowledge as a danger. I would like to stress a theme that has consistently appeared during this hearing: common sense conservatism. We, the Republican Party, are seeking solutions to election system problems. Why overhaul a system that is not broken? The Democrats seem to want to. What I hope you saw today showed the true light as to who is solving the problems and who is creating them. We are one nation under God, but at the end of the day, we give states their own rules. A one-state solution does not work for an entire nation. Nationalizing the election system and mandatory voting violates the very document that the United States was founded on. 50 different perspectives are needed to truly find solutions within the system. We understand changes need to be made, but the system does not. With gerrymandering, both parties have a stake at play. But we need to put away political greed to put forth the common good and the will of the American people. However, the Democrats seem to be perfectly fine with pinning this on the Republicans, instead of trying to work together. Citizens' votes are our will. The whims of those in Washington cannot overpower the will of the American people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, and I will absorb, and I'll begin my closing statement. I have many thoughts about what's been said here today about a variety of issues. Firstly, mail-in voting, which I think is blaming the issue of the 12-year-old burning the cake inside of the oven. If the complaint is that people don't understand how to actually work with mail-in ballots, as we see is expanding in several states, my side is the only one advocating for a more national program where people understand and this issue doesn't continue. We talk about gerrymandering, and while we show maybe 3 states up here in our panels, we certainly have a variety of the other 47, including, I believe, you represent the state of Mississippi, which has an outreach population of African Americans that we see are crammed into one district in a Republican-run state. We talk about the Electoral College, and I think there's a little bit of confusion because the issue at hand here is representation. And yet, while that's talked about by Dr. Fraser, I don't believe that any of my colleagues on my other side actually give solutions to that. My side over here is actually advocating for change. We talk about the Constitution and what it originally says, but I'll remind my friends on the other side of the aisle that if you walk down the street to the National Archive and look at the Constitution, the original wording of the Constitution calls me 3/5 of a person. More than any other thing in our Constitution references voting. The 13th, 14th, the 19th Amendment all talk about representation and election rights. What could be more important than advancing that in this age? If we have shown on our side that there is a misrepresentation problem, and all the Republicans have to do on my other side of the aisle is complain about how blame is being pushed to them or how there is a problem, and my side is the only one advocating for a potential solution, well, and I think we understand what the American people want to know and the way we should move forward. I certainly appreciate the information given here today on a variety of issues in terms of the cybersecurity threats, the strides that we've made to make sure that the confusion of the 2020 election doesn't continue, and ensuring that in the future, whether it be mail-in balloting, whether it be some combination of voting rights, nationalized plans, like we already have with standards like the Voting Rights Act and the Bipartisan Act of 2005 that also create nationalized plans for elections, I think that in the future, the better representation of everyone should be at the forefront of our minds. I'm so glad that you all could join us here on this hearing. I think that we'll meet in committee afterwards and discuss a recommendation for the full Senate. With my time now elapsing, thank you all very much for joining us and to adhering to our rules. I now call this hearing to a close.
Ladies and gentlemen, these are our students. They're always impressive. This research that they put together, their presentation always wows me. Congratulations. Another round of applause for you guys here. Senators, stand up. Witnesses, stand up. Turn around. I want the legislative assistants to stand up too. You guys who helped. Legislative assistants, researchers. Two more little things. These coaches, I forgot them a while ago. Stand up. Y'all stood up a while ago, but these guys are upperclassmen who worked with this group so well over the last 6 weeks. Thank you guys so much for your encouragement and your inspiration, and thank you guys for doing this and volunteering for this. But so thank you so much. Lastly, judges, we have 10 judges up here. Just so you'll know, Tuesday at 11 o'clock, Dr. Bass, I want to make sure that is that the date we set? I want to thank you too for engaging in this and bringing her class into this program. Thank you very much for doing that. These judges have a rubric. We're going to put this together. We've got about 6 or 8 awards we're going to give away at Tuesday at 11 o'clock in the plaza. So if anyone is here and wants to join us, please do that. It'll be fun for the battle for the gavel. Lastly, before we leave, I just want to let you know that in the Lott Institute, room 113, we've got some pizzas and some water. We're going to have a small little social there. You're welcome to join us. Thank you very much to the Lott Institute. Mr. Billy Gotchell. Yes. And Dr. Jones, stand up. Dr. Jones, stand up. We're always in partnership with them. Many people see us as one entity. We are 2 entities, but we work every day jointly and in partnership, and we can't do our job without them, and we appreciate it so much. Everyone who traveled, everyone who participated, you guys, wow, phenomenal. Thank y'all so much, and have a good night.